The counterfeit industry is huge. Those fake products make up 2 to 3% of total global trade each year, and Asian countries play a major role in both producing and distributing them. But, Duke, one of them, Vietnam, is finally clamping down on them.
That's right, Mariko. Fake luxury goods exist for many years, but the government started a aggressive crackdown after the US threat to impose crippling tariff if they don't shut it down.
But there is clearly demand for those fake products. So we're asking, why do so many people buy counterfeit goods? I'm Mariko in Singapore, and this is Asia Pacific from the BBC World Service. Twice a week, we bring you Asia Pacific stories, unpacked by those who know them best. Well, I have two journalists who've looked into this issue. Duke Ha is from the BBC World Service. Welcome to Asia Pacific, Duke.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Lindsay Tramuta, who's a freelance journalist based in Paris. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks so much for having me.
And you've recently written an article looking at this counterfeit industry for Bloomberg, haven't you? So, if you can maybe start off by painting the picture how big these fake luxury goods market is globally.
So, at the time of reporting, the OECD was painting this at $467 billion worldwide, which really represents about 2.3 to 2.5% of total world trade. Asia has become a primary source when it comes to manufacturing and distributing counterfeit goods. And Southeast Asia is unfortunately a major hub for distribution and even localized assembly across the region.
I was also reading how China and Hong Kong account for over 70% of the value of global counterfeit goods that have been seized. But as you said, Lindsay, some Southeast Asian countries have become major hubs for distribution. And Doug, we're focusing today on Vietnam because it's been singled out by the United States for, I guess, failing to address this issue this year. But before we dive in, can you also paint the picture how common those fake products are in Vietnam?
So there's no official number about the scale of this market in Vietnam as they are informal and shadow economy. But the past 2 months, I've seen a lot of thieves. I've seen a lot of sellers being arrested or under prosecution, which I never seen before. And they estimate the seized product worth tens of $millions. Uh, if I had to describe, I would say you can easily find the luxury fake in every corner of Vietnam. Back in the day when I was in the university, I used the fake Nike to go to school, and I survived my hometown winter by using the North Face knockoff. Ain't no way my parents would pay half of their salary to buy me the real one.
So consumers in Vietnam, they don't really mind buying fake goods.
I would say so, but sometimes they don't really know they are buying the fake one.
How does it work though? Because I was reading how China is kind of the major manufacturer when it comes to those
Yeah.
fake goods. So does Vietnam also produce them, or do they just distribute made in China fake products?
So the answer is both. When it's come to the fashion, um I would say they import a lot of like white brand, and then the local manufacturer will label the brand name on those products.
Label
But
as in
when it
like
come to
Chanel or Louis
yeah,
Vuitton.
sure, true.
Okay.
Because they do it to fool the custom. Because why the good they import, there's no logo on it. Then when it comes to Vietnam, they start labeling the Gucci, the Dior, the Louis V. But when it comes to perfume and medicines, I think the Vietnamese start doing that from the scratch.
So they're producing them as well.
Yeah, we're talking about the products like shampoo or perfume.
Okay. But I mean, I don't want to assume how old you are, but you're talking about when you're a university student. So if those fake products have been around for quite some time, why this aggressive clampdown now by the Vietnamese government? Can you just explain, I guess, political reason behind that?
So months ago, the US started the investigations in Vietnam, and since last year, I think the government tried to diversify the export market rather than the US. But like it cannot be done anytime soon. So the Vietnamese products still depends on the US market, and
Okay.
obviously the authorities don't want more tariff on our products because it's still one of the main driver uh, of the Vietnam economy. Also, for many years, Vietnam is famous for the place where assemble the final product. But now they want to involve more in the supply chain for the high technology product. By cracking down these things, the government want to improve to the world that like we are um trust partner. One
It's super
reason,
hard though, Duke,
one
right? It's super hard
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
governments
It's
to
mean
actually find the strategies to curb this problem. I mean, the EU is facing a similar challenge, and you can look at it from border control. You can look at it from the actual manufacturing of the products that need to have certain digital IDs and ways to make the product's lifespan very transparent, but even those can be doctored. So, how confident do you think, the government really is, or even the consumer is, that, cracking down will lead to curbing the problem?
And I guess, I mean, would you say, Lindsay, that the market has developed? Because, I remember fake luxury products being around when I was a teenager, but have they kind of improved to a point that even the fake ones almost look really real, that to an ordinary
Absolutely.
consumer's eyes, you can't really tell the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. They're being made much better, more convincingly. They're really easy to dupe. Even the keenest eye, people who are used to consuming luxury goods, sometimes they're even made from the same leather tanneries. They use hardware from the same vendors as the originals, and these are called super fakes. And that means that they are copies that are nearly indistinguishable from the originals, and that can be quite compelling for a consumer who finds that the luxury market has partaken in something called greedflation, which is essentially, letting willingly skyrocketing their products over the last, I would say, 7 years. Because if people will buy it, they will keep raising the prices, but the quality, most consumers say, has diminished.
I mean, tell us more about how those super fakes are being spotted, because you spoke to some people who actually do those, can I call it authentication, I guess, of
Yeah,
real stuff
absolutely.
to super fakes?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it involves a really deep history of fashion and luxury. So they're both pairing a deep reservoir of knowledge around these products, how they're made, what collections they're from, with certain tools. So they're identifying, with a fine-tooth comb, every detail of a bag if it goes through physical authentication. But most of these companies now have AI detectors, but none of these things are foolproof. I mean, that's the main issue here, is that because they're getting so convincing, there can be minor defects that are almost imperceptible. And so, how are you going to thwart this? It also relates to when products are coming in. So when the products come in from, whether it's Asia, whether it's Turkey, onto mainland Europe, as a specific example, it's about how much border control there is. Action needs to involve so many different layers, both policy, both product manufacturing, and also how these things are being inspected when they come into the border.
Doug, you were saying earlier how some people in Vietnam may not be aware that they're buying fake products, but it's become kind of a hub where not just locals but also tourists go to buy those fake luxury goods. So, what kind of proportion are we talking about? Is it actually become like a tourist attraction? And if so, like what kind of percentage are we talking about here?
Yeah, I don't have the exact number right here, but I would say yes, in the big city like Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, and right at the center of the cities, like many tourists go there to buy the fake Louis V's, and it's have been the main source of income for those vendors over there.
So, how do those vendors feel about this latest clampdown, their livelihoods could be affected, even though, maybe they're aware that selling fake products isn't okay.
The fears is real, and right now they're trying to cope with it by signaling each other. Like, let's say there's someone standing outside the market, and he start like observing if there are any officials coming closer. If there is, he starts signaling the vendor inside. So now the supplier, they try to dose the regulation by change the brand name a little bit, like from Adidas to Adada, or like from Hoka to Hako. By that, they can say, hey, we're not producing the counterfeit. We're producing our own brand.
Yeah, I don't think that holds up in intellectual property court. I think the owners of those companies are probably going after them anyway.
Would you say, Lindsay, consumers, you talked about how the prices of real luxury products have gone up so much that a lot of consumers can't afford it. Would you say that they are increasingly more comfortable buying fake products, knowing that they're actually fake, even in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen more social media backlash from consumers in the US who feel a kind of pride by buying dupes and showing off that it's really close, so let's just go ahead anyway. And I think it's really an issue of being aggrieved. That's the way people feel when they look at how the luxury industry has continued to raise their prices, but the quality has not followed. And one figure I found showed that from 2019, the prices of luxury goods jumped 54%. And that's from HSBC Holdings, a report that they put together, with some handbags in particular jumping, double the price. And this has really contributed to a culture where consumers aren't as concerned with it being fake, but it really is a problem because of how these industries function for their health. And what's interesting is I had spoken to a representative from a luxury French trade organization that is trying to protect the luxury industry, and they work together with different companies to work on digital ID products, but also sort of education. And I think it's important to look at this as an awareness campaign of, okay, you're not just buying something that's convincing, you're buying something that is potentially toxic, bad for your health, and also supports an extremely dangerous industry.
How is it toxic, though? Can you elaborate on that?
So, the luxury handbag companies or luxury goods are working with very specific materials and very specific conditions. But when you have counterfeiters, they're going to cut corners wherever they can. So they might be using glues that are toxic, or tanning methods that expose the end consumer to different unhealthy products. The other thing that people need to understand is that it supports often organized crime. So whether that's drug trafficking, human trafficking, child labor, all of this is behind the scenes of a lot of these counterfeit operations. And so you're not just buying a bag, you're buying into something that allows these companies or these counterfeiting organizations to really thrive in other activities.
Duc, I'm just curious how the Vietnamese government is tackling this now, given this latest warning from the United States. You talked about raids and, busts of Market Store earlier. Are there anything new that the government and the police are doing at the moment?
If you look at the media outlet, it's very easy to find the article on a lot of sellers being arrested, some under prosecution, some in jails already, which I never seen before, even though like they've been doing that for like many years. On the one hand, I think it's kind of like performative. They want to show the US like, hey, we are doing the real thing. We are tackling on it. And the second, I think they want to show the example for the other seller. Hey, could be the results if you continue to sell the fake product. But yeah, personally, I think that's not enough. Like they should do other than just cracking down, maybe by educating, maybe by communication.
Or they need to take a page from the European Union and come up with, a multi-pronged attack and also try to, ensure that there are these digital IDs on all the products.
Lindsay, can you just explain it? You said digital ID. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so the European Union introduced legislation requiring all new textiles, electronics, and furniture actually to contain these digital product passports, which are essentially IDs. And so some of the companies have already started to replace their old authenticity cards, for example, with these digital IDs.
Do you think that's something that maybe Vietnam is considering, aside from those, as you called it, kind of performative raise? Would they consider doing something like the digital ID that Lindsay was just talking about?
I haven't heard of it, but I think the government also try to, because the leader right now betting the economic growth on the private sector, especially the SME. So by cracking down the fake product market, they create more room for their local brand to thrive. So yeah, so for example, now the Vietnamese consumer can pay the same amount of money for the better shoe with more function rather than just a brand name.
Duc, we were talking earlier about how the Vietnamese government has started this aggressive clampdown after many years of trying to tackle this issue because of this growing pressure from the United States. Where do you think this counterfeit market will go in Vietnam? Do you think this kind of clampdown will continue regardless of the US pressure? Will the fake market shrink in your view, or maybe not?
To some extent, I say yes. They still continue cracking down those counterfeit sellers. I think there are two reasons. The first one, they trying to formalize the informal economy. So by that, they really have to push the GDP growth. And the second one, as I mentioned, they betting on the private sector for economic growth. So by squeezing down on of their shadow economy, they create more room for the local brand to try and compete against the other international brand.
I guess the battle to tackle those fake products continues. Thank you so much for joining me, Lindsay and Duc.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been watching Asia Pacific from the BBC World Service with me, Mariko Oi, in Singapore. If you have any questions or comments on what we covered in this episode or any other stories from the region, please leave us a comment below. You can also get in touch with us on email, asiapacific@bbc.co.uk. And you know the drill, click like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.